Yeah, I'm sure this is probably going to be something a lot of people are not too happy to see. I mean, as a consumer of video games myself, I want them to be as cheap as possible because I'm greedy. I want to be able to buy as many games as I can. But there has been this argument, this notion for the past few months now that GTA 6 should or may increase the amount of money they are charging for just the standard edition of GTA 6. Now, if you didn't know, video games have cost $60 for the absolute longest time, but then in the past maybe 4 or 5 years now, they have risen to $70. Now obviously you have some indie games that are $20, $30, $40, $50, but I'm talking specifically the standard edition of the top of the line AAA type games. So $70 is pretty much where the bar is right now, and I remember reporting on it maybe about a year ago that Rockstar, and specifically Take-Two, was talking about the idea that games should cost more than what they do right now, because the amount that is put into games these days is just a lot, and that you can just spend so much time in games these days. There's a lot more content to experience with a game like GTA 5 versus, maybe 30 years ago with a game like Super Mario World. But now, just a few days ago, there has been an actual video game analyst named Matthew Ball that talked about the argument of why GTA 6 should charge more than just the $70 base value for the game. Now, this was in his presentation called The State of Video Gaming in 2025. Now, the whole thing is actually super interesting. It is 223 slides long, like PowerPoint slides. It's not actually pages, so it's not, that intimidating, but it's very interesting. I'm going to link it in the description, and specifically, the last 10 pages, he talks about this whole idea of GTA 6 being more than $70. Now, I have to say, and I hate to say it, this might be where you click off the video in frustration, and if you do that, I totally understand, but I have to say, trying to be objective about it, he makes a very good argument. I don't want to pay $100 for GTA 6, don't get me wrong, but the facts he presents are very interesting, and if true, as long as I'm not being duped by fake statistics here, it brings forward a very interesting argument. So essentially, the argument he makes is that the real-time value of video games has severely declined over the last few decades. So one chart he brings up talks about games in the 70s and the 80s and compares them to right now, specifically how they were charged and how much this actually was as far as the real dollar amount. So for example, games in the 70s actually were about $200 in terms of today's US currency. In the 80s, they went down to about $120, the 90s $100, and then the 2010s about $80, and then now today, 2025, $70. Again, the real dollar amount, taking into account inflation, that's very important to consider because, all the way back in the 70s, it looks like the standard game was about $40. So to go from $40 to $70 over the course of 5 decades is kind of wild, considering he then brings up statistics talking about like the average concert ticket or like the average price of Netflix, even in the past like 10 years. And he talks about how this has been pretty much appropriately adjusted for inflation, but that the prices of video games have not followed suit. He also talks about how if GTA 6 does cost $70, that it would be the cheapest ever Grand Theft Auto title according to real dollar value. So he makes the argument that GTA 6 is wildly popular, and so if it charged 80 or 90 or 100 bucks, it could set the stage and then other games could follow suit. He also talks about how, indie games that cost today, say $20, could move up to $30, or the $40 games today could move up to $50, and so on and so forth. Yeah, like I said, I really almost hate talking about this. I kind of hate the words that are coming out of my mouth right now. I did not expect to look into this slideshow and to be at least somewhat convinced. I'm not saying I'm fully convinced, but again, to try to be objective, he does make a good point. But I'd love to know, I'd love to hear if there is something here that he is not bringing up that is showing how much of a dummy I am and is just totally duping me. Because, with all the stuff he does bring up, I do also have to think about how a lot of video game developers, it would seem, are still struggling a lot. So if games did cost more, maybe it could relieve some of that stress from developers. I don't know, because then I also think about how games costing more could lead to some consumers just opting out, choosing to not play these games that they otherwise would, or maybe it could even lead to an increase in piracy. I don't know, I'm still a conflicted man right now. I don't know how much GTA GTA 6 will ultimately end up costing for the standard edition, but I do know now I'm a little bit more convinced that if it did cost more than $70, maybe it wouldn't all be a bad thing. I still hate that I'm actually saying that, but you know, later this year when it is released, we will see how much it costs.